Welcome back to Buckeye Talk. I'm Stephen Means, and that's Andrew Gillis, and this is your Monday pod, and this is a recruiting pod. And it's been about a week since we've done a recruiting pod, and there has been some news developments that have happened in between really those for like 10 days since we did our last recruiting pod. Up top of everything, though, on Saturday, Carter Lowe, the 79 player and the number 9 offensive tackle out of Whitmer High in Toledo, committed to Ohio State. We had just did a pod, Andrew, talking about the defensive side of the ball and how great they've been recruiting lately. And now Ohio State offensive side of the recruiting has picked up its second top 100 recruit. And Carter Lowe, what is Ohio State getting in that player, and what does he mean for the class?
Yeah, so he's a big offensive tackle out of Toledo. This was a kid I went up and I saw him during the course of the season. It was kind of funny. There were a couple of times throughout the year where I kind of got screwed in terms of going to see a kid play. Went and saw Carter Lowe, and it poured down rain, and he played like 4 series because his team was up pretty big. But the reason that he only played 4 series was because his team was really good. He goes to Whitmer High School in the Toledo area. He is a big boy. I mean, he's listed at 6'5", 290. I want to double check that. I want to have some measurements to see what Carter Lowe is at, because he is a big fella. But you said it, 79 overall player in the class, number 9 offensive tackle. This was a guy who was getting courted by the best of them: Tennessee, Alabama, Michigan, Georgia. He didn't start playing football until a few years ago. So when I talked to him earlier in the year, one of the things that he kind of mentioned was the Ohio State-Michigan thing is cool, but it doesn't have as much of an impact on me as it might, somebody else who grew up a Buckeye fan or grew up a Michigan fan. So I can look at this with a fresh perspective. And I thought that was a really interesting take from a high school kid who, again, just kind of started recently playing football. But you add him to this class, and you start to look around the room at what else could happen, what else could be on the horizon, and you start to see the makings of what could be a really special class for Ohio State. Because for years, what were the concerns with Ohio State, recruiting? That the quarterbacks and the receivers would just kind of buoy the rest of the class, and the offensive line wouldn't be where it was, and the defense wouldn't be where it was. Okay, well, you have a 5-star corner who's ranked number 6 in the country, and the number 2 corner overall. You pulled him out of Texas. You have Zahir Mathis, who's a 4-star player, kind of borderline between 4 and 5-star. He's a defensive end out of Philly. You have a 4-star quarterback in Tavian St. Clair, who's kind of rocketing up the rankings and has been for a couple of months. And then you add in Carter Lowe, who is a top 80 offensive lineman. You beat out some big-time schools to get him. Like, this is just a big deal. And I feel like I say this a lot, but it's true for kind of what this means, because he's not a 5-star player. He's not the highest rated recruit on the offensive side of the ball. But Ohio State signed 0 top 100 linemen in the 2024 class. They signed 1 in the 2023 class, and that was Luke Montgomery, who was number 92. And they signed none in 2022. So you've signed 1 top 100 lineman in the previous 3 cycles. The offensive line was pretty good in 2022. Nobody really noticed in 2022. You had Paris Johnson, who was the, OT number 1 in the NFL draft. You had Luke Whippler, who was like a later round NFL draft pick. You had DeJuan Jones, who was a mid-round NFL draft pick. And he was kind of an athletic freak because he was huge. I mean, you can attest to this. He's probably one of the biggest people you've ever seen. And that in and of itself is a big deal, because now you add another top 100 lineman and you can start to map out what this class can look like and kind of the potential for where this class could go. Ohio State's, they're interested in another top 100 lineman, Micah DeBose. He decommitted from, I'm trying to think, it was Alabama or Georgia he decommitted from earlier in the cycle. And it was Georgia he decommitted from earlier in the cycle. And he's from Cleveland. Like, he grew up in the Cleveland area and then moved down to Alabama. So that's a kid that Ohio State's after. Like, you can start to see, like, okay, now you have this, kind of linchpin piece on the offensive line, and you might be able to go get another one or another 2 that would be a huge deal for Ohio State's offensive line recruiting, especially because what we've talked about for the last, I don't know, handful of months, handful of years.
So, from a recruiting perspective, once again, you mentioned the fact that they haven't had a top 100 offensive lineman since Luke Montgomery in 2023. But Luke Montgomery's from Ohio, and you're expecting to get that guy. Then you go back to 2022. Degra Shabola was right on the verge of being a top 100 recruit. He's from Ohio. Donovan Jackson was in Texas, but he's got strong Ohio roots. Paris Johnson from Cincinnati, Ohio. Carter Lowe, big pickup. I don't want to take anything away from that, but it does feel like he still fits that mold of what we've seen Ohio State be able to do. Is that they're a highly rated offensive lineman in their backyard. They're able to keep those guys home. You mentioned Micah DuBois as a guy with strong Ohio ties. He's from Cleveland, Ohio, but lives in Alabama. But does this at least get the ball rolling on the idea that in 2024 you could see a bigger offensive line class in terms of both numbers, but then also quality of players when you look at their offer sheet and what's potentially needed in this class?
Yeah, I think so because I mentioned DuBose. You have Carter Lowe. You can Mason Short is kid out of Georgia. I know Georgia's going to be really, really tough to beat, but Ohio State's interested there. There are guys in this class. Matty Augustine. He's a kid out of Connecticut that Ohio State's interested in. Like, there are guys that you can point to and say, like, all right, you can pull him in and you can pull him in and you can do this and you can do that. And you can start to map out a quantity, like the quantity of the class is good. And Carter Lowe kind of gives you this not linchpin, but pillar, I guess, of an offensive line class. I've made this case multiple times when we talk about recruiting, especially along the offensive line, that recruiting rankings are not the be all end all. They're not the be all end all for any position, but I think you have a pretty good idea that Jeremiah Smith is going to be good. I think you have a pretty good idea that Devin Sanchez is going to be good. Like, there are guys that you can look at the rankings and say, like, that's probably about right. The offensive line, it's a lot more difficult to kind of judge because the offensive line is such a development position. When we talk about Carter Lowe joining Ohio State for the 2025 season, we don't mean Ohio State's 2025 offensive line got a boost. We mean Ohio State's 2026 offensive line, maybe Ohio State's 2027 offensive line. That's where you start to see the boost. So we're talking about an offensive line that's not going to be, kind of benefited by Carter Lowe unless, unless something crazy happens. And, if he kind of sticks to a normal offensive line trajectory, that's not going to be kind of there for another 2-3 years. So when you look at the quality of offensive linemen, though, having a guy like that, it just allows you, and it allows you the freedom and the safety to go look around and say, like, all right, we already have this. Where else can we get better?
Is Lowe a true tackle, and is he a left tackle or a right tackle? If the answer to that is yes.
We'll have to see. He played left tackle at Whitmer. Like, this is a guy who you look at kind of what he does, and he's got the athleticism to move, and that was something that I really liked about him. When I watched him play, he can move around a little bit. He's got good bend. Just he fits the profile of a tackle. Now, I'm curious as to where he would fit. Like I said, he played left tackle in high school. Does that mean that he has to play left tackle in college? No, it doesn't. There's a lot that goes into that. Maybe you like a left tackle better. Somebody's better at left tackle than he is, or, whatever the case may be, but he's certainly a tackle. I think maybe down the line, if you're filled at tackle and you want to try him somewhere else, I think you could, because I think he's got the size and the athleticism to do that. But yeah, this kid is someone who will get first, second, third crack at being a left or a right tackle.
So that's Ohio State's 7th commitment in its 2025 recruiting class, and its 5th top 100 commit. It joins Devin Sanchez, Zahir Mathis, Tavian St. Clair, and Blake Woodby as the top 100 recruits in that class. That commitment also takes Ohio State from the number 6 class right now. They jump Clemson, Auburn, and Oklahoma for number 3 behind Notre Dame and LSU in the recruiting rankings. We're going to take a quick break here on Buckeye Talk, and when we come back, we're going to talk about some other things that have been happening around the recruiting circle, including a commitment that was postponed and a quarterback that Andrew went to go visit over the past week, given all the news that has come out of Ohio State's quarterback room. We'll get more into that when we come back here on Buckeye Talk.